when you start in Treasury, I think it's just this one path forward, and this is what it looks like everywhere. I wish I would have started building my network sooner, and I've made up for it over the years, but then finding other opportunities to learn so that I was more well-rounded in the beginning. So I could have taking on some opportunities a little bit sooner, but I do think things happen for a reason. And so being a little bit more inquisitive early on, I think could have benefited me. Because somebody also asked me, what's your biggest regret in your career? There were things that have happened in my career that weren't great, but I've learned from them and they've transformed me into the person that I am today. So no, would I necessarily want to repeat some of those things that have happened? No, but they did add value in the end because I was able to find what I could take from those situations to then better myself, better my career path. And so I would say it's not, even the bad is not always bad.
Welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I'll talk to treasurers about how they build their careers, where they are now, where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. Let's get on with the show. In this week's show, I'm joined by Sherri Nicole Speaks, the Vice President Treasury at JBT Marel Corporation. JBT Marel is a leading global provider of integrated technology, equipment, software, and services to the food and beverage industry, driven by a singular purpose to transform the future of food. They empower businesses to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving market. So whether you produce or operate in animal protein, plant-based products, fresh produce, whatever, they work with you guys. So these are the guys behind the scenes sort of thing. And JBT Marel actually reunites JBT and Marel, who were two pioneering companies with complementary strengths. So they come together. We'll talk to Sherri a little bit later about how, with combined portfolios, they're well equipped right across the food services industry. Enough of the sales pitch for JBT Marel. What I'm going to do, we're going to talk about Sherri and her career. So, Sherri, if you would, take me back to the beginning, how you first got started in Treasury. Over to you.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So I feel like I stumbled into Treasury, and I always love having this conversation with other folks in Treasury because you can't go to school and get a degree in Treasury. We all kind of stumble our way into it in different ways. I have a little bit of a checkered past here in the U.S. folks, what people will understand. I started my career after college as a subprime mortgage underwriter. And I always take people back to if they saw the movie The Big Short, and
Yes.
at the end they're doing the recap of the industry, and it says, on May 7, 2007, New Century Mortgage files bankruptcy. Well, that's who I was working for on May 7, 2007. And
It wasn't your fault, was it? It was
not my fault.
You were just there. That was.
And at that point, it was, what do I do next? A lot of folks stayed the path and just went to the next mortgage company. But I had known before that there was something else I wanted to do. And I had gone back to school a few months prior to that to start working on my MBA. Then I said, okay, I'll figure out what I want to do when I grow up after I get my degree. Well, timing didn't work out for me, and I found myself unemployed. And after almost a year, got a call for a job as an assistant in a Treasury department. And at that point, I called my mom and I was like, what is Treasury? And so we did internet research. We had no idea what Treasury was. And thankfully, the treasurer at the time saw something in me and an opportunity to help me restart my career and, again, start over and go down a different path, and one that has actually turned out to be incredible. On the first day of the job, he plopped the Essentials of Treasury Management on my desk and said, start studying. And I was like, I'm in school right now. But I took it seriously because I knew very quickly that this was a new opportunity. It wasn't just a job. It could really be a career. And I try to have, when I talk to folks, making sure people understand the distinction between a job and a career. And I knew this could be a career. And so I started studying, very quickly became a Treasury analyst, and have been working my way
all the way through
the ranks ever since.
You said you knew it would be a career. How? What was it that, hang on, this could be my career, Treasury? How did you know? You started to read the book, you've read the introduction, but you're suddenly, this is my career, or how did it go?
It was different from the industry I was in prior because it was a loan, it was a house. You looked at somebody's credit, you said yay or nay. Here in the department, actually was at my prior company, everybody was doing something different. When I was studying the book, there were so many different things that were covered. I had this person over here working on international, this person over here working on domestic, this person over here was working on pension related things. It was so vast, and there was so much opportunity. I could see that right away. So I was like, oh, I could go down this path, or I could go down this way, or I could learn it all. And
Yeah.
Jack of trades, master of none, maybe. But that's the one. There's several things I love about Treasury, but that's definitely one of the things I love most about Treasury. It is not pigeonholed into one space. It can look very different depending on the size of company, the industry you're in. There's so much opportunity. So it's just really,
To learn about.
it gives you an opportunity to really grow.
And when you gone in, and we skipped a bit actually. So you were working for Illinois Toolworks.
Illinois Toolworks is another global diversified manufacturer.
Well, I was going to say, who are they? Or give us an idea. If you're in UK, Europe, you might have never heard of them. Or what's the size of the company, or what's the background? Because then, what was Treasury like for you as you started?
Yeah, so Illinois Toolworks, massive company. I think they're about $15-16 billion now. They did a few divestitures about 11, 12 years ago where they scaled down a little bit. So when I left there, they were an $18 billion company, wow. 900 business units, every 9 different segments, everything from packaging to food equipment, tooling, things like that, flooring at one point.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating because not only was it domestic, that was my first experience working with people internationally, starting to understand international business. So that was all really fascinating. That department was a little bit more siloed. You either worked on international, or you worked on domestic, or you worked on the pension related things, but they were still, for me, and I think it was actually really great. So it was a little bit of a moment for me to kind of have to start my career over and go into this entry level role. But I think the way I came in was actually really great, because in that assistant job, I worked with everybody. So I had this opportunity not to just go in and just do my one job. I have to go in and interact with everybody so I could see a little bit of what everybody was doing, which was really great. And in that corporate function, then I learned, oh, I've got to work with the tax folks. I've got to work with internal audit, all these, and as well as the people in the business units. And when I was at ITW, they were very much an acquiring business. They grew very much through acquisition. And so I was able to develop into a role where, as we acquired business units, and because cash is so important, I was one of the first people that new businesses would talk to when they were acquired. And so I got to develop all these relationships and become this trusted resource for the business units, not just domestically, also internationally. So it was really great.
And you also, I know when we had our pre-call, if you like, so ITW and then JBT later, which we'll come on to, you saw a clear runway. What did the runway look like to you, if you like, and how did you make the most of it? As you say, you got to know people, and then, hang on, I'm in Treasury now, I really enjoy it. And how did you then develop that, or what happened?
Yeah, so it's a couple things about, one, who are you surrounded with and your mindset. For me, it was about building my brand and building my network. Networking is incredibly important to me. I don't want to just work in a silo or with blinders on, or think just what I'm doing is the end all be all. Having that group of people, whether it be to learn from or to commiserate with, it's great to have that network around you to build things up. And so I was able to, through my network, but then also people that I worked with when I was at Illinois. So there was a gentleman there who I'm still very much in contact with, the director of Treasury, John, who really took me under his wing and would share. He was very good about teaching, and I was open. So that relationship is a two-way street. Finding somebody who's willing to teach you, advocate for you, be an ally for you, but then you also being open to learning and being flexible is really important. And so when it was time for me to transition and move on to a new company, that was when that really took off. Here at JBT, I took over the treasurer role last year in 2024, and my predecessor was probably one of the best allies and mentors I have had in my entire career.
Yeah.
He was all about learning. He was all about, I need to make sure you're ready to take this role when I'm ready to retire. And that's exactly what he did for me.
Just before we move into that role, if you like, but you then started studying whilst you were at Illinois Tool Works, and you then started to get more involved with AFP. Can you explain how that started? Because then, when I was doing my research, you said you've been on the test development committee. Oh yeah, let me put my hand up for that. Sit for like 20 years. I mean, come on. What have they got on you that, you can't get out?
I know, right?
We're not letting you out of this room.
For more.
Yeah.
AFP's really got me locked in, and I
Yeah.
absolutely love that organization. So yeah, I took the CTP exam, and not too long after taking the exam, actually, I got a call from AFP saying, hey, we're looking for volunteers to participate in our test development committee. And I have always been in the mindset of making sure I'm in the position to say yes when certain opportunities come up, right? It doesn't always seem like it's the right time. Things can be really busy and hectic in your day job or in your personal life. But how can I position myself? Because not all of these opportunities come up.
Yeah.
So when they do come up, it's like, okay, how can I be ready to embrace this opportunity? And so they called, and I was like, they really want me to participate?
I've only just done my CTP.
I was like, okay, this is fascinating. Yeah. I want to know more. And I went to that first meeting, and I still have very close friends, not just colleagues and people in my network, but friends that I met from that very first meeting when I started at the test development committee. Some that I'm actually on the board with them now, which it's been a great journey. And so I've been involved with the test development committee all these years, and it's nice being on the inside track. It's hard work, but it's actually really rewarding. Had an opportunity over the years to speak at conference here and there, whether a vendor or a banker would say, hey, do you want to participate in this panel? That was very nerve-wracking because I wasn't much of a public speaker as I was coming along. But again, saying yes and figuring it out along the way. Yeah. And then just not too long ago, got a call to participate in the conference playoff task force, picking sessions in the risk management track. And so that was also a really great opportunity because again, you got to see the inner workings of how conference was built. AFP conference every year is like one of my favorite times. It's exhausting. If you do conference right, I say you leave exhausted because you just so many opportunities to network and catch up with people and learn and then also have a good time, right? So if you do FP right, you come back a little bit exhausted, but it's really a really great time. So being able to participate in the task force and really to review the sessions was really great. And that's when I had an opportunity to meet some former board members who I'd start to have some conversations with. And in 2024, decided to take the leap after some encouragement and put my hat in the ring. So it's been great so far.
So I think for any listeners as well, as you did the exam to develop yourself as a treasurer and treasurer professional rather, and then you grew and then, as you say yes first and regret later something. But
I don't know if it would work for everybody. For me, I've been really successful at that.
And I think that's part of it because we had this again with Gina Collis, one of our previous, and a lot of the other guys I've had from the committee and things, and one from the board. And what I've said, and I've said this to a number of people, the fact is that you put your hand up, get involved and everything else. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, just by trying that, it's, you're going to grow, you're going to develop your skills. I've said to people, I'm not up for when I first started, I wasn't up for public speaking 20 years ago, but now you just do it all the time and it's a learned skill and it's going to help you in your treasury profile and everything else. Now, exactly. and the other bit, there was another really good bit. You said about going to the conference, which is fantastic. I'll be speaking. I'll be seeing you there and lots of other people. But I did my session last year with Nicole Meyer and Summer Simmons, absolute session. And we started our session and we had an official title for our session. We threw that away. We said AFP Conference 2024. I didn't actually do it on a slide. I just said to the room what not to do. It was like, this is what we're telling you. But what I talked about, I said to the room, who's been here before? And half of the hands went up. It was quite weird, about 50% of hands. So who hasn't been here before? The other 50 had, so 50 had been, 50 hadn't. So, right, I want you guys to talk to you guys. Because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And Summer covered it really well. She said, take some time out and things. So I said, look, later on when it says free bar, walk away or have one and walk away. This is a Sunday. I've seen broken people on a Monday afternoon.
Don't go hard. That's the
Oh.
wrong, do not do that.
Pace
It's
yourself.
a lot. Pace yourself, please, because it'll be all worth it, but absolutely pace yourself.
Yeah.
There have been times at conference where I'll be like, okay, I'm just gonna run back to my hotel room a little bit because I need to get away for a little bit, because you see so many people and you're having all these conversations. You're like, okay, let's take a breather. So I go hide a little bit every once in a while. And it's coming from a place of privilege, right? Because I've been able to grow my network and know so many people. And it's like, okay, maybe I know too many people in this room. I'm gonna go hide for a little bit and then come back and continue on because it's so fun.
Yeah, well, I've done it when I've come back from a couple of conferences like AFP or somewhere and do them, and I walk in the room and my wife was like, all right. I was like, yeah. And I like the half hour of not speaking, just because it'll be the first half hour I've not spoken constantly for 3 days. And it's just like, oh, okay, just it's fantastic, but just me time something. So, okay. So we got to then you making the move. So you were working for Illinois Tool Works. What happened next?
I decided I'd gotten to a point at Illinois Tool Works and I didn't know if there was a next step for me there. And again, very career focused, looking for that next role and path. And I told myself, okay, if I'm going to do this, I should get myself ready, mentally ready to take that leap, looking for another job. It's not a concept I take lightly. I was at Illinois Tool Works for 6.5 years. So you build a brand there, you build a social network there, and then you leave it all behind and start over. That for me is a nerve-wracking concept. And then as I was kind of going through that, I got a call from a recruiter and it was about this JBT job. And so I had a conversation with the HR person at the time. And then she's like, okay, you're going to meet with Greg Packard, who's been on your call before. And
it's been great.
Immediately went and LinkedIn stalked him and saw that he was connected with John, who I mentioned earlier before, who I worked with at Illinois Tool Works for a while. And I called John. I'm like, tell me about this Greg guy. And so he's like, I'm interviewing with him. He's like, oh, you'll be just fine. And sure enough, he was right. I was just fine. And we hit it off really well. And it was, again, one of those things where I came in and there was a lot to learn. I was drinking from a fire hose. I had a unique experience when I first started at JBT. The gentleman that I was replacing, he was moving. And so he stayed for like a month. I had a month of transition. Right. You don't usually get that. You're usually taking over a job that somebody left and trying to pick up the pieces. But I had him for a month. And so I took everything I could take from his brain at that point. And at the time, the company was going through some transition. We had spun off from our prior parent and the company had been stagnant for a little bit, and some new leadership, a new CFO and CEO had come in and trying to get the company to grow and develop into this food platform that we are now. So when I started, they started the acquisition activity, which again was in my wheelhouse because of my work at ITW. So that was really exciting. So I was learning Treasury from a new landscape, because JBT, though very similar to ITW, segments in the food space, a little bit decentralized, global diversified, big bank groups. It was still Treasury they still did Treasury a little bit differently. And I was like, well, that's not the way we did it before. And so learning certain things a new way was a little nerve-wracking, a little bit, but obviously very rewarding. And it became this journey over time of, we had put in a shared service center. Again, we were doing all these acquisitions. And so there was a lot of opportunity for me to learn, whether, changing up our capital structure, which is very different from it was when I first started, opportunities with our international business units and whatnot. And Greg was just really purposeful about inclusion and including me in meetings, even because I started at JBT as a senior analyst. And a lot of times you don't see senior analysts in some of these meetings. And Greg, we have a small department. So Greg was like, nope, coming in a meeting, you're going to learn. And I say this to my team now too. You may not catch everything that's going on, but the more you're in these rooms, every time you're going to pick something up. And as much as I want them to obviously stay with JBT morale and be around, they need a knowledge base. They need to learn. And as soon as you get that knowledge, nobody can ever take it away from you, right? So I tell them to be a sponge, manage their capacity, right? Because you're constantly in meetings and whatnot, but I will invite them If they want to take part and continue to learn, I am here for it because I want them to have the opportunity to build their skill set and be a very well-rounded treasury person.
And just, I gave that headline speech about JBT unites, JBT and morale and stuff. When you arrived, what were JBT and who are they now? And then we'll go back into your career path. So, yeah, because I always like to, for listeners, sometimes, they work in totally different industries, but then they go, oh, actually, that's quite similar to us. Well, that's very different. Yeah. Just talk us through that briefly.
Right. So when I started at JBT, we had two divisions. We had our food tech division and we had our aerotech division. Again, we were a spinoff from another company. And so they'd spun off these two divisions, the food manufacturing space, a lot on the poultry side, some beverage, things like that. And then on the aerotech side, ground systems equipment, the jet bridge you walk on to get onto an airplane, two things that really didn't mesh. And so we were constantly
totally different.
explaining who we were to investors and maybe a little bit to ourselves as well. But the board and our leadership were really on a path to get us to become a pure food play company. And that's what we were striving for. And so in 23, think about the calendar here. In 23, we divested the aerotech business, sold it off to Oshkosh, another great company here in the Midwest. And at that point, it was like, okay, now we have the opportunity to do something transformational in the food space. And so that is when, not too long after the aerotech deal was finished, we announced the Morel transaction. And it really was bringing together two very complementary businesses. When you look at something, for example, like a poultry processing line, we now have this value proposition to the customer where we can be that one-stop shop because we can offer that full line of products that the Tyson or another type of company would need to process that poultry, right? Yeah. Same thing in the beverage, in the pet food space, and then kind of growing those lines again, that value proposition to be that valued provider for the customer to where they can have one source of truth. Yeah. And so it's to see the company grow because we've done a lot of bolt-on and smaller acquisitions, and anybody who's done acquisition work knows that you have some big acquisitions and you have some smaller acquisitions. Sometimes the smaller ones are harder to do than the bigger ones, especially if they're like smaller family-owned businesses and trying to get cultures changed. But then this Morel transaction really being transformational. You're bringing two companies that were very similar in size together. So you have lots of people, you have duplication from corporate functions, things like that. So it's been quite the journey since November of 23 when we announced the deal to get through funding, regulatory approval, getting the deal close to now really working towards some meaningful integration and ensuring those synergies that we talked about and touted from bringing these two companies together, and obviously delevering because we actually took on quite a bit of debt to get this deal done. But it's really rewarding because for my team, the way, I've proposed it to them and they believe in, they're, fully locked in, is we have this unique opportunity to build a treasury department. We don't have to take just what we did in the past. We don't have to take just what they did in the past. We'll take pieces from each. And then if there's an opportunity to just turn things on their head, we have an opportunity to do that now because we can build our department from scratch to now make the best function for this combined company.
You and I have talked about this, and I've actually talked previously to Greg Packard, your ex-boss, who's now, headed off and stuff. Can you talk about how he was your mentor when you walked in that door? So with the previous boss, Greg's great, but how did he make an impact? What was he like as a mentor? So again, I said to some guys in Dublin last week when we were doing one of our sessions that, they were saying about, they were having mentors. I said, but what was in it for the mentor? What was in it for them on their side? Talk us through that relationship.
Yeah, Greg and I hit it off right away. We got, for better or worse, probably similar personalities. Right. So it was a great time for me to discover I could be myself in the corporate world, not have to put on airs, turn myself into some corporate robot, but still learn, still have opportunities because he appreciated me for who I was. And he actually, some people take the learning and the training and say, okay, it's just part of the job. I think Greg just he really shines in that space. He's a really great teacher and he knew how to explain things really well. And so one of the things that really worked for us is not only did we have a great working relationship, but we could laugh and get along because we had a great personal relationship as well.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always go for everybody. Some people like to just do work, but that's not how we worked, right? We could go and talk about, he knew a lot about my family, I knew a lot about his. And so developing that rapport was really important. I was very open to him, like, this is the point I'm trying to get to. I want to grow my career. I was coming in as a senior analyst, but I didn't want to be a senior analyst for the rest of my life. Yeah. And for him, he knew, okay, at some point, I'm going to move on to something else or retire. I want to make sure you're set up for success. So that was all from a very early on, was our path together. It was outlined. It was discussed. And so it was, okay, what are the pieces that I need to continue to grow so that when these opportunities come up, I'm ready to embrace them. In the Treasury space, in the corporate world, he was, for me, one of the best allies I've ever had, not only as a woman in the Treasury space, but as a Black woman in the Treasury space. As you can imagine, and as some people may not want to imagine, there's some interesting dynamics that you come across in the corporate world. But when you have somebody advocating for you and being an ally for you in that space and not allowing for any of kind of those dynamics to come through, it is really, I've been really lucky and privileged to have somebody in my corner like that to bring me along the path.
And you also talked when we had our conversation, but you got that role, senior treasury analyst. You're now the treasurer, so you've gone through that, and Greg got you there. But I know you were conscious of being liked by the team, of being at one stage of the team member, then you're team leader, and then you're the full leader. How have you balanced being approachable with sometimes difficult conversations? How do you do that? So how have you dealt with that?
That's really hard. You know, I think one of my spaces of opportunity from a leadership perspective is I do want to make sure I want to be somebody's friend. I want to be that trusted person. I don't want to have this kind of just very rigid mindset. So making sure I stay approachable. And sometimes when you build those relationships with folks, it could make it harder to then not necessarily reprimand or have the difficult conversations and bring things up with folks. But I would actually turn that on its head and say, if you do build those relationships with people, when it's time to have those difficult conversations, they're a little bit easier to have and they're easier to digest on the other side, because that person knows that you're invested in them, that you have a good relationship with them, and you're coming to them to help them get through whatever this issue is. Right? Yeah. So it's about building that relationship. And so for me and my team, over the years, we've just been able to grow really closely together, and they know that, I've done their job before. And I think that's one of the benefits for my team is I was the analyst at one point. I was the senior analyst at one point. All those roles I know. And so they could come to me, and I'm not going to give them some, overarching kind of high level. Like, I've been in the weeds. I know exactly what they've done before. And I think that kind of helps them a lot, because they know I'm not just giving advice from, coming from a different place. I've done this before. Yeah. So between my experience and having done those roles before, but then also just, again, being personable, being open to share, knowing that I'm not just going to come in and we're just going to work, or we're going to go and we're going to eat together. We're going to maybe go have a drink together. I've met many of their families, their kids, things like been to weddings, things like that. So that all goes in. I honestly think that is what is different for our Treasury department versus the other departments in our company, honestly.
And it sounds to the listeners, but you and I have had this discussion, it's all been smooth sailing, just like an easy life.
No.
You've gone... But you've gone through layoffs, you've gone through massive deals, imposter syndrome. You face these toughest moments. Someone listening, they're going, well, it all sounds great, but actually, again, how have you overcome them, or how have you got through it?
Yeah, those, it does sound like really great. Like, I put in my time and
I was on the board, I've done this. That's what I mean. That's what I'm reflecting.
There's been so many bumps along the road, but there's couple of things. One, you surround yourself with the right people. Yep. You surround yourself with people that you think also have your best interests at heart. And then, for me, being rooted in my personal foundation and my faith and what my end goal is. And it's important to have like no delusions of grandeur. If you think you're going to take on a role or go down a path, you're going to get there super smoothly, all you're doing is setting yourself up for success. And it's not to be a glass half empty person, but it's to be rooted in reality of kind of what the world is. You're going to come across situations that are really hard. You're going to come across conversations that are really difficult. You're going to come across people that aren't in your corner.
Yeah.
Come across situations like just world dynamics, like, the economy or things like that aren't in your control. But you say, okay, how do I position myself to when these things come up, they happen and I can come out of them quickly.
Yeah.
And continue on my ultimate goal of being X or doing, whatever. And some people's goal isn't to become a treasurer, is to maybe, just continue to learn or whatever it may be. But what is your end goal? I used to hate when people would ask, well, what do you see yourself in 5 years? And I didn't have an answer. And it wasn't until I started really getting rooted here at JBT, saw that I really had a mentor and an ally that was like, okay, nope, this is what we're going to do. And these are the steps and the roles to get you to climb the ladder here. And I was like, oh, okay, I actually see a path. That's the next role. And that's the next opportunity. And then getting people in the industry and talking with them as well. And they took this role, then they took this role. And this is how they learn. And these are the people that they know. And these are the education that they got. It's okay. I'm going to be rooted in these things and be very purposeful. For me, my career is very important. So I don't take these things lightly.
Yeah.
And so this is my path. I'm going to stay the course. You're going to have craters and bumps along the way. And I'm going to dig myself out because I know the end goal is still for me to get even further.
Our podcast is sponsored by ICD. ICD are an independent platform trusted by thousands of treasury professionals worldwide to manage short-term investments. One global treasurer recently told me it was one of the smartest technology decisions they've made. No license fees, rapid setup, and tangible returns. If you're looking for a smarter, simpler way to manage your liquidity, then head to find out more at our partners page, treasuryrecruitment.com/partners, and find out much more. Let's get back to the episode. So we had our pre-chat as well. And one of the things you talked about, that chasing dollars was never your thing. You weren't really focused on that. But when recruiters like me, amazing recruiters like me, came calling and the money's coming there and you knew it wasn't the right thing, but you put down the phone on recruiters. You see, we never nearly fell out, but we never did. It was all right. I can understand the reasons. But can you, for the audience, explain how you got through that? You knew the money was there. How did you hold your nerve, or knowing it wasn't the right thing?
I had that unique opportunity to be laid off from the mortgage industry and have to start over again. Before, as terrible as the time that was, I learned so much from that time in the mortgage industry and then that space of time where I was out of work. I knew that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I was really young and I was making really good money. It was incredible. I was like, I can do all these things. This is not money that I grew up with.
Yeah.
I wasn't really happy. And I knew money didn't make, you have this job, you collect this check every 2 weeks, and you're still incredibly unfulfilled. So I knew very young, fortunately or unfortunately, that wasn't the end all be all. And so for me, it was really about that starting over. The grass isn't always greener. Maybe sometimes it's a little less brown, but do you sacrifice all the work you've put in, all the social capital for maybe just the dollars? Are you really taking the right step in your career path? And for me, the way it's been set up for me here at JBT is this opportunity for growth. But I also was at a company that was growing. So there was an excitement of what was next to come in the company, right? So it's like I could jump to another senior role, or I could jump to the manager role. I could do that. But then, am I really integrated in the business? Do people really know me? Am I still just constantly trying to learn about the business and figure out who to talk to? Part of what makes my job, my job is not easy, but what helps me on my day-to-day is, even after 11 years here at JBT Morel, and there's been changeovers, like somebody could say, hey, do you know who you talk to for X? And I was like, yeah, I do, because I've been here so long. I put in my time.
Yeah.
Or it's like, hey, do you know what happened when we did this transaction? Well, yeah, I do know, because I put in my time and I've been here and I've stayed the course. And again, there was a pretty defined path. I knew where I could get to. if it was set up to where it's like, okay, yeah, I don't know when he may retire, or I don't know, there may be some roadblocks. I don't know what's going to go on with the company. I would have been a little bit more interested in having some of those conversations.
Yeah.
But for me, like I had put in so much effort, I wanted to see it through, honestly. It was like, if you're on a certain path and this is what you want to do, you got to see it through. If you keep saying, all right, I'm going to try to something else and then go down that path, it's taking, and for me, in my mind, it was like, it's going to just take me even longer to get to that role. So being mindful that the dollars don't make, I mean, the dollars make a difference. You want to make sure you're well paid, and we put in a lot of work, a lot of hours, and you want to make sure you're properly compensated, and there's nice things that come with that. But you can't take it with you. So while you're here, are you fulfilled? Are you probably feeling fulfillment doesn't always come through money. It comes through experience. It comes through, who are you interacting with on a daily basis? Do you feel like, if we're just talking from a work perspective, what is your company trying to do? Do you believe in the mission? Things like that.
And that segues nicely, as if it was planned and we did some rehearsal, into your sort of mindset, personal development. I know that you've talked in the past about how you've dealt with anxiety in your position, and then you work with an executive coach. What have you learned about that? How has it helped you, and how has it helped your leadership sort of thing?
Yeah, being very open and honest with myself and the people that I work with, I think is really important. And some would probably maybe disagree with that level of vulnerability, but it is just who I authentically am. And getting to that place, and you talked about it a little earlier about imposter syndrome or the anxiety, and those things get heightened when you're trying to be somebody that you're not. And so that is not energy I want to give. I want to make sure my energy is put in the right spaces so that I can be successful. And, a lot of people deal with anxiety, deal with it in different ways, and it can become crippling. And I want to make sure that the things that brought up my anxiety, that heightened my anxiety, did not cripple me. When I took over the treasurer role, it was a very short transition period, very early on in the transaction, trying to get this Morel transaction done. And I'm like, I'm taking over now, and this is the amount of transition time we have. And so I just got very nervous and very anxious of the surprise of the timing, the very short amount of time of transition, with this other side of, well, this is what I wanted, and this is what I work for. This is what I thought it was going to look like, but I'm here and I want to be successful at this. And thankfully, I just had the foresight. There was a thought came to me, if I'm going to be successful at this, I need to make sure I have the right support, and I need to make sure I get help. And it's not that I didn't believe in therapy before. It was not something I'd done before, but I'd found a lady through my church who's been a therapist but has a coaching practice. And so I reached out to her and I said, Jackie, I need help. I want to be successful, but here's what's going on. And I am very nervous and anxious about it because I'm not quite sure 100% what I'm getting myself into. I've been here a long time, but there's some other dynamics here. And having somebody that I can lean on, because I'm still working with her. So I've been working with her for a little over a year now. Somebody I can say, this is what I'm feeling. This is the anxiety I'm having around this meeting or this person or this relationship, or just managing all, because it was so heavy. And there's a lot of eyes, getting all this funding, making sure the department stays stable through this transaction, working through closing the deal, and this integration. There's a lot of eyes and a lot of pressure on it. And I was like, I want to be successful. I don't want to get this opportunity and then don't do it well, because I put all these years of being in Treasury to get to this point. And so she has been incredibly helpful for me to just navigate getting out of my own way, honestly.
And in association with that, you've built your personal brand. And as you've said, unapologetically authentic. That's one of your phrases and stuff. So for other advice for treasury professionals who feel they maybe have to be a bit more corporate, I've been through a similar thing over the past 6 months with my business coach. And she said, you need to get out there and give advice and do these Friday videos. And I'm like, really? And, so we do the bit of advice on the Tuesday. Then I do the bit of advice to camera. And I'm like, the first few weeks, you're like, oh, really? Seeing this? I mean, that's why I've got a face for a podcast. You can see this. But the fact is, now I had a YouTube coach. He approached me. He said, oh, you should be on YouTube. I'm like, no, treasurers are on LinkedIn. This is where they want the advice. And I said, look, I've had 250,000 impressions in the past 3 months.
Oh, wow.
These guys love this stuff. And I'm not building the personal brand to go, hey, look at me, Mr. Treasury. I'm doing it because this is what my audience like yourself want. And that's what I'm talking about on stage at AFP conference in Boston. Yeah. Meredith Vance and Sandra Ramos. We're talking about how those ladies have built their personal brands. And all I'm going to do a lot of the time is just repeat some of the stuff I've done. And that's what I think treasury professionals will do. But that's enough of me talking. This is your podcast. But what advice do you give to treasury professionals when they're, that balance between corporate expectations and you, and how do you get the two married together, or how do you do it?
It's a journey, right? Because there is that initial, you create that basis of, you've got to make sure you're a trusted resource, that you're technically sound.
Yeah. You
can be a great person, but you can't do the job, right? You can't do the job. But you're not also going to be able to do that job if you're in this struggle of, all right, who am I showing up as every day? You're only going to get part of your results going to be stifled by all the energy that you're putting into being somebody that you're not. I say that from personal experience because I'm trying to walk into a room of people that aren't like me, that don't have the same background as me, and trying to fit in and assimilate and play the part. But then I don't show up fully in my work. And what it then becomes is physically and mentally exhausting to try to be somebody that you're not. And so then I'd gotten to a point where I was like, sometimes you find some situations like, okay, I did that and this has worked and this is the opportunity I've got from it, but it was a really painful path to get to that opportunity. Or you put in the work and it still doesn't happen and you still have some negative interactions when you put on this effort again to be somebody that you're not. It's like, okay, why am I going through all of this? And it's not very fulfilling to me. And so I've just gotten to the point of, this is what you get. I know what my value is and what I can bring to the table. I'm also still in the posture of making sure I am still learning and developing, because I'm convinced we will never know it all, especially in the treasury space. Yeah. Just in general, you'll never know it all. And so the point where I got to, I said, okay, this is who I am. If you don't like it, there are plenty of other people out there, but I'm not going to expense all this energy to try to be somebody that I'm not, because I'm not going to be successful in my role. Whether it be things like aesthetic things, like we think about the corporate world 20 years ago, you wouldn't see people with tattoos or things like that. And it's like, nope, if I'm going to you're going to see all these things about me. Yeah. You're going to hear about the things that I like to do outside of work. You're going to get the authentic version of me, because I don't have capacity to pretend. I really don't.
And if someone, you touched on it there, if someone listening is at similar crossroads as you were back in 2007, so quite a few years ago, but unsure of the next step, what advice would you give them that sort of relates to that, if you like?
Well, some of it is building a network and finding people who are surrounding yourself with, because if you find, because sometimes you compartmentalize it, right? You have this group of people that really know yourself around, and then these people are not. If you continue to build a network of people where you can authentically be yourself, when you're in those other situations, it becomes easier and it just becomes part of your posture again. Okay, I'm just going to be myself. I'm just going to be natural here. But again, being a trusted resource when it comes to the technicals is really important. So you can't say, okay, this is who I am. You're going to have to accept it. But what I've made sure I've done over my career is, especially at JBT, making sure I become that trusted resource and can be of value in helping the business and being technically sound. So they kind of go hand in hand. So I developed those relationships. People know that they could come to me. They were going to get good information. They were going to get a good corporate partner to help achieve certain goals or solve certain issues. And then as they got to know me, they really got to know me.
Yeah.
Because they were like, okay, this is who she is. And I was comfortable as I built the relationships. I was like, well, I've been working with that person. They know who I am. They know what I can do. And maybe I can actually just be myself. So it becomes this path and journey of a little bit of give and take at times. It's not always perfect. But if I try to just make sure I stay in that mindset of go in in your authentic skin, who you are. And what I've learned is most people are actually pretty receptive to it.
Yeah. And you and I spoke before. You go to an AFP board meeting tonight, so you're on the AFP board. You kept on saying yes to that, which is one of the reasons. I had Pat Corkin on the show, and we had a number of the board members, and he and I talked about some of the biggest opportunities and challenges facing the profession at the moment, and you guys at the AFP being part of it. And it's now people listening today, they get a CTP credit, which is a great thing to do, but it's also, I didn't originally do this podcast to do this. I thought we'd do 10. We've done 358, 360. It's like, because I love talking to treasurers like you guys. So what are the opportunities, challenges you see coming down the line for treasurers? Then we're going to do the LinkedIn piece. And then I've got a killer final question, which I'm going to do, but was holding that, but it's a good one. It's an easy one. But AFP, what challenges are coming down, or opportunities would you say?
I think a challenge and an opportunity both for the Treasury profession is going to be, how do we bring up young people through this career? Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not like you can go to school and get a Treasury degree.
Yeah.
So how do we basically market our profession? AFP's been doing some great work with universities. And so if we can get more involved there, people out of school end up knowing, oh, Treasury is an option. It's not just banking or accounting or some of the other business roles, right? Like, oh, Treasury is an option. And when people find out about Treasury, they go, oh, you guys do all of that? I was like, yeah, we do all of that. I gave a talk to some of our accounting folks the other day that were in from all around the country, and explaining all the things that are captured in the Treasury Department. They're like, oh, that's amazing. Getting a good basis of folks that we can bring along the career path. I got a pretty young team, and so they'll be able to grow and develop. And then just from an industry perspective, it'll be interesting to see where things like technology and AI, how they affect our business. Yeah, I admittedly have not been a proponent of AI in the beginning. I can see places where it is beneficial now as I'm learning more.
Yeah.
But when it comes to money, we've got to be really, really careful, because there's so much at risk. So when we're talking about AI for applications throughout our lives, there's obviously lots of implications. But when it comes to money, there can be some really negative implications. So I just think we need to be careful to not jump on these bandwagons of technology. We need to embrace them, because they can be really beneficial and really impactful for how we operate. But we need to be really careful not jump on bandwagons just because, oh, this is the newest trend and this is what everybody else is doing. Because does it really fit what we are doing in our space? Does it really fit what your company is going for, what your risk tolerance is? So I think we just need to be really careful with that.
Be aware of the bright, shiny things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you and I, we're going to go to the close in a minute, but we're not quite there. But we are going to meet at AFP Conference Boston, which is going to be fantastic. And anyone listening today, you can go to our partners page, treasuryrecruitment.com/partners. You get a discount for coming to the conference. So, and also for CTP study. So that's why we partnered with you guys and everything else. So that's a key thing. And I'm giving that shout out. So, go to the partners page, look for it. We're going to put your LinkedIn details in the show notes. So that's where you're getting a flood of people. And people said, oh my God, it was great. Loads of people connected to me that wanted to. And takeaways for today's show. And I have got a closing question. It's a good one though. So what are your takeaways for someone that, is in their career and thinking, I'm early stage of my career. This is great. What should I do? What decisions should I make? And for the more senior people, what are the takeaways?
Building your brand, building your personal brand. Who are you when you walk into a room? And is that authentic to you? Building your network. You can't do it alone. Create a village for yourself that you are learning from and that you can pour into as well.
Yeah.
And then be a sponge. Again, we don't know everything. There's so much to learn. The industry, the world is changing so rapidly fast. You want to make sure that you are well-rounded. You're up to date on all the things that are going on. You don't want to be pigeonholed into one space. So find opportunities to learn, whether it be within your company or outside of your company, like an organization like AFP. There's lots of webinars. Your career is in your hands. It's only going to be as successful as the effort that you put into it. And yes, you're going to have people that champion you and bring you along the way. You want to make sure you have people in your network where if you need an opportunity, you can reach out to, but you are in charge. So don't wait for things to happen to you. You have to make them happen.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to finish quite there. I've got this one thing, and it's not a trick question, so it's a good one. But it's like, say you had that time machine, or you had that cell phone or home phone or whatever it is. If you were to phone yourself when you were starting your Treasury career, so when you've come out of mortgage broking and things like that, and you're looking back and said, what's the one thing now that you know, or a couple of things that you pick up the phone and say, hi, Sherri, it's me. It's like, wow, I'm 20 odd years.
Yeah.
What were the things you wish or you reassure yourself? Just to reflect on that, if you like.
Yeah, I think I wish I would. When you start in Treasury, you think it's just this one path forward and this is what it looks like everywhere. I wish I would have started building my network sooner, and I've made up for it over the years, but then finding other opportunities to learn so that I was more well-rounded in the beginning. So I could have maybe taking on some opportunities a little bit sooner, but I do think things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
And so being a little bit more inquisitive early on, I think could have benefited me as well. But, sometimes I also think, because somebody also asked me a similar question about this recently, and what's your biggest regret in your career or something like that? And I say, well, you know what? Or something you wish didn't happen. They were talking about like the mortgage thing. Again, I learned a lot from it. There were things that happened in my career that weren't great, but I've learned from them, and they've transformed me into the person that I am today. So no, would I necessarily want to repeat some of those things that have happened? No, but they did add value in the end because I was able to find what I could take from those situations to then better myself, better my career path. And so I would say it's not, even the bad is not always bad.
Love it. You've been an absolute superstar, and I know you've got to catch a plane soon. Thank you very much, Sherri, and looking forward to seeing you very soon.
Great. Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Today's episode of the Treasury Career Corner was brought to you with the support of our partners, ICD. If you're looking for a smarter way to manage your short-term investments, ICD's independent portal gives you access to a full range of investment products, integrated analytics, and a simple centralized platform built specifically for Treasury. If you head over to treasuryrecruitment.com/partners, you can learn more, and we'll be able to connect you with the right person at ICD for both you and your business. Many thanks for listening to the show, and thanks for your continued support.